Hi, Year 5. I have the pleasure of reading the end of Fing for you today. So I'm going to be reading chapter 37 and then something called the Epilogue. You remember the prologue all the way back at the start? Well, today we'll be finishing with the Epilogue. So, chapter 37, Silence. Months passed with absolutely no sign of Myrtle. There were no sightings of her anywhere, despite Mr. and Mrs. Meek putting up a poster in the window of the library. I'm just going to hold that up to you there. There's the poster. It says, "Our darling daughter is missing. Have you seen Myrtle?" It also says, "No need to telephone. A letter will suffice. A second-class stamp is fine. No rush, thank you kindly." Of course, they wanted their daughter back safely. Life just wasn't the same without her. Even though now they didn't have to carry the great lump to school. In fact, now they didn't have to buy a ton of chocolate every week. Now they could read their beloved poetry books in peace. Now they could wake up in the morning to the birds singing in the trees rather than the sound of Myrtle howling. Now they could watch things other than cartoons on the television. Now for the epilogue. In fact, it wasn't until they were watching a nature program one evening, some years later, that Mr. and Mrs. Meek finally discovered what happened to their daughter. "Here, in the deepest, darkest, jungliest jungle," began the safari-suited expert in hushed tones, "we can see all kinds of curious creatures that we thought had died out many years ago." "That's where I found Fing," exclaimed Father, nearly spitting out his tea. He and his wife were sitting in their caravan, which was parked exactly where the house used to stand. Sadly, the house was still a pile of rubble. "There might be a clue to the whereabouts of our beauteous daughter," replied Mother. The pair leaned forward on the sofa. On the screen, the expert continued his commentary. "This patch of earth, so remote that even we don't know where we actually are, is home to all sorts of creatures that our forefathers thought were monsters, and which have only been written about in a long-lost ancient book entitled the Monsterpedia." "That's the book from the vaults of the library," said Father, dunking a crusted cream biscuit into his tea. "Behold these creatures which have never, ever been captured on camera before. Look, there's a honkopotamus. That is a flock of long-winged birds. The two-headed reptilian creature is a croco, and just buzzing over my head, which is why the earth is now entirely in shadow, is the flying elephant. However weird and wonderful you think these creatures are, nothing compares to the Fing." "There it is! There it is!" shouted Mr. Meek at the television. On screen, the giant furry ball rolled into view. Fing had grown even bigger and was now the size of a planet. A small planet, but still a planet. This colossal, entirely round being has just one eye and an opening at each end, though no one knows which end is which, not even the Fing itself. Surely this is the most curious creature in the deepest, darkest jungle. "Yes!" shouted Mr. and Mrs. Meek back at the television. The presenter continued. "Well, an animal not even listed in the Monsterpedia is this bizarre-looking beast. A creature that, as far as we know, has never, ever been seen by humans before." Mr. and Mrs. Meek slid off the sofa, so their faces were now right next to the television. On the screen appeared an extremely curious creature indeed. It was impossibly tall and thin, as if it had been flattened or rolled into shape. "It is almost human in form," began the expert, "but this is no human being. Caked in mud, it lives in the swamps of the deepest, darkest, jungliest jungle, where it feeds on giant worms or pludges. The only sound it makes is moo!" Right on cue, it let out another moo! Mr. and Mrs. Meek knew that sound. "Myrtle!" they screamed. "Should we try to bring her back?" asked Father. Mother studied the screen and watched as Myrtle took a massive chomp out of a giant worm. "I think she looks happy enough," replied Mother. "You're right," he agreed. "Why spoil her fun?" The on-screen commentary continued. "From what we have observed over the months we've spent here, this creature is by far the most feared in the deepest, darkest, jungliest jungle. When it approaches, all the other animals scatter. True to his word, as Myrtle stomped through the tree, stomp, 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 the honkopotamus used its wind power to shoot off. Pfft! The elephant flew into a tree, and Fing rolled off in the opposite direction. However, it wasn't fast enough for Myrtle's long arms. She grabbed hold of the colossal beast. "Urgh!" it growled. She lifted it above her head and hurled it right at the presenter. Bosh! Ah! The presenter screamed. Then the screen fizzled to black. "Oh dear," remarked Mother. "Oh dear indeed," remarked Father. The next morning, Mr. and Mrs. Meek woke up with the feeling that they needed to do something. They weren't sure exactly what, but something. When they arrived at the library before opening time, the first thing they did was descend the steps to the dark and dingy vaults. There was a dusty old leather-bound book that had started them on this journey, the Monsterpedia. "Have you got a pen, Father?" asked Mother. "Here you go, Mother," replied Father, handing her his fountain pen. The book bounced up onto a table and opened itself. Flick! The lady found an empty page and began writing. Now, the Monsterpedia can finally be complete. The Lesser Spotted Myrtle. A surprisingly flat creature, found only in the deepest, darkest, jungliest jungle. It is a swamp dweller and spends its days eating giant worms, going "Moo!" and generally scaring the life out of all the other animals. The lesser spotted myrtle is a highly dangerous creature and should never be approached. It is an absolute monster, which is why it belongs only in the pages of this book. Excellent work, Mother. Oh, thank you, Father. Cup of tea and a biscuit. Ooh, custard cream. Ooh, yes, I don't mind if I do. So you see, Mr. and Mrs. Meek really did have a monster for a child. Of course, monsters belong in only one place, the deepest, darkest, jungliest jungle. So, children, do make sure you behave, or you might just end up there. I hope you've enjoyed the Fing. And it's a book that I've certainly enjoyed with Year 5 in the past. Very silly, fantastic adventure. Continue to listen to our videos, and this is a sort of story that I think can be enjoyed again and again and again. So thank you for listening along, and please let us know if you got to the very end and what you thought of the book. Maybe write a review, that would be helpful. Okay, thanks again, Year 5.